And finally tonight, the commander-in-chief becoming the 19th president to give the commencement at the U.S. Naval Academy. President Trump's message to the class of 2018 is our quote of the night. Watch.
I do say strive for excellence, live for adventure, think big, dream bigger, push further, sail faster, fly higher, and never, ever stop reaching for greatness. Never stop reaching for the stars. We know that glory will be yours because you are winners, you are warriors, you are fighters, you are champions, and you will lead us only to victory. Good luck. May God be with you. God bless America, and anchors away.
Anchors away. Congratulations to all of the graduates at Annapolis today. That is our story for tonight. Have a great Memorial Day weekend. Tucker Carlson, up next.
Good evening and welcome to a very special edition of Tucker Carlson Tonight, Inside the Issues. Politics is suddenly ripping this country apart. On college campuses, students attack free speech in the name of tolerance. Civil rights activists have abandoned their worthy old causes to obsess over abstractions like global warming. In this once Christian country, leaders are now demanding that we bomb Bashar al-Assad, endangering the lives of the world's oldest Christian community. We'll hit all of those issues tonight, plus they're eating horse meat in parts of this country, amazingly. But we're going to start with the FBI's efforts to spy on the Trump campaign back in 2016. That happened. There's a lot more evidence for it than there is for collusion with Russia. But not surprisingly, the media response has been predictably dishonest. Here's a selection.
President Trump doubles down on his baseless claims of spies.
This so-called spy issue, first of all, there's absolutely no evidence there was a spy. So it's really a fake issue.
It's this phony baloney story about a spy on the campaign. To call them a conspiracy theory is to give them too much credit. Just fake facts.
They're liars. Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, as reliable a barometer of mindless conventional wisdom as exists on planet Earth, explained it this way in a recent interview, quote, "A confidential informant is not a spy." Well, Senator Graham did not explain what exactly a confidential informant is, if not a spy, because, of course, they're one and the same. A confidential informant is someone who is informing confidentially, in other words, spying. And any senator who pretends otherwise is prevaricating, in other words, lying. Dan Bongino has been following the Russia story since the very beginning. He's a former Secret Service agent and a contributor at NRA TV. Dan, you've been on law enforcement your whole life. If I'm confidentially informing on you, what am I doing exactly?
Tucker, this is the most of a series of sickening, disgusting, disturbing episodes by the Pravda. No, they're not even Pravda. You know, because Pravda was at least honest about being dishonest. The Pravda media now pretends that they're actual journalists distributing facts. Keep in mind, Tucker, they want to do counterintelligence, these people. They can't even do journalism. Now they're pretending to be counterintelligence and law enforcement agents. This is the most dangerous cover-up by the media I have ever seen. Every serious person in law, I said serious, by the way, in law enforcement that I know, not the hacks out there trying to cover for this, knows what happened here was a spying operation. SPY, SPYY if you're Joe Biden. This was a spying operation. Period. Full stop. Anybody who tells you otherwise is joking around.
They're all telling us otherwise. They're all telling us otherwise, which is why I'm beginning to doubt myself. I'm open-minded. Tell me, sincerely, am I missing something? They're saying it wasn't a spy, it was a confidential informant. Is there some difference that I'm missing?
Yes, there is, Tucker. But the difference works against the Pravda media, not for these jokers, okay? Here's how we would commonly in the law enforcement intelligence arena, where I had intersected and worked for most of my adult life, it would work. An informant is actually someone already existing inside of an operation who would inform on the operations of said operation, the mob, whatever it may be. A spy would likely be someone you bring in who is not a pre-existing member of the operation. You try to insert and intersect with that organization to get information to either prosecute them or investigate them on a CI case, which means the guy in this case was a spy. These knuckleheads are Tucker, do you understand this is full-blown propaganda?
I
this
do,
is so
but
dangerous
I mean,
what's happening.
Either way, the person's function is the same. He's spying. He's gathering information, not telling you that he's doing it and sending it to a third party. By the way, if this was done, and again, I'm asking dumb rhetorical questions just because they keep throwing this at you like black is white, 2 + 2 = 8. I just want to make sure I got this right. If they were doing this for the benefit of the Trump campaign, as Clapper is now claiming, wouldn't they have told the Trump campaign, hey, we're worried that the Russians are trying to penetrate you? But they didn't.
Well, Tucker, if this was for the benefit of the Trump campaign, why not equally assist and support the Hillary campaign, right? I mean, Hillary's husband had taken $500,000 in a speaking fee from a Russian bank. Why not equally, the dreaded air quotes here, help them too and put an FBI confidential human... It's a scam. I mean, what's in it, Tucker? The euphemism game. What is it next going to be? An undocumented FBI employee? This is so destructive because the American people, liberal, Democrat, whoever you are, you need to understand a gross disservice was done here. There were illegal leaks, and there was a potentially illicit spying operation for political reasons. Everybody, vote for whoever you want to vote for. I don't care. I'm just telling you what happened here was an abomination to the Republic, and the media is covering it up.
It's amazing that they're going along. I mean, it's one thing to see Nancy Pelosi defend the indefensible. That's what she does. But to see reporters, a lot of whom I know and am friends with, have known a long time, they're lying about this. I actually find it shocking. Dan, thank you for the clarity on that, as always.
Yes, sir.
Well, for more than a decade, Democrats have been pushing out in the open, they're not hiding it, to raise gasoline prices. They say this will somehow fight global warming. But now, with the 2018 midterms on the horizon, they're trying to assail the president because gas prices are rising. Chris Hahn is a radio show host, and he's a former aide to Senator Chuck Schumer, and he joins us tonight. So, Chris, this is, I mean, look, there are probably things that you could say about Trump's performance that are negative. But for Democrats who are pushing for higher gas prices to attack Trump because gas prices are rising seems like hypocrisy on a scale we don't see that often in Washington. Or I'm missing something.
Well, Trump should be attacking himself. I mean, if you read his tweet from October 21st, 2011, he said, blame the party in power for high gas prices. Those are his words, not mine, not Nancy Pelosi, not Chuck Schumer. So it's on him.
But okay, I think that's fair, and they're making the case that the drama in the Middle East is making oil prices go up, and there's probably some truth in that. I'm against it, as I've said from day one. But that doesn't change the fact that Democrats, as of last week, Democratic governors across the country are calling for gas tax increases. They're for higher gas tax. It's in the Democratic platform. So what kind of sick person do you have to be to attack someone for doing what you're calling for us to do?
Well, no, you're conflating the issue here. They're calling for a useful tax to help go to other projects, while right now we're just throwing our money away to the Middle East and other places because of the president's own policies. That's
policies,
very
hold on,
than doing
policies that they support.
We're sending money overseas we should be keeping here.
That they supported. We just had a vote in the House 3 days ago. Force against Iran. Most Democrats voted for it. Chuck Schumer, who's now denouncing Trump pulling out of the Iran deal, was against the Iran deal. They're for military action against Iran. They have been for years, and now they're criticizing it? This is insane.
Well, look, if we had a constructive way to replace the Iran deal like the president promised he would have, maybe we wouldn't have so much turmoil in the commodity market that manages crude oil. That's on the president. This is directly related to him. And if he wants to take credit for things that are good in the economy, he has to also take the blame for things that are bad.
I get
and
it,
this, sir, is on him.
But he's doing what Democrats have called on the country to do, and it's having an effect that they agree with. I mean, it's also dishonest. It's like mind-blowing.
Democrats.
Okay. Let me ask you this.
They have not called for higher commodity prices. This is going to hit the middle class and the working class more than anybody else.
It's in their platform, and if there's any group that has undisguised contempt for the middle class of this country, it's the Democratic Party. That's why they've been for higher gas prices from day one.
That's just not the case. When gas was $2 a barrel, $2 a gallon gas was $2 a gallon under Barack Obama. They said, hey, let's put 5 cents on that gallon and put it to programs that we could use for this country. Right now, gas is approaching $4 a gallon under Donald Trump. And I think that's a big problem for the working people in this country. And I think the president needs to address it forthwith. And if he doesn't, the Republican Party will be held responsible.
You guys have a lot of chutzpah, I will say that. I mean,
in 2018.
I'm not even going to look. Anybody who lives in this country who's been paying half attention knows what's on this list. But I have a list here of, I don't know, a dozen different Democratic politicians calling for higher gas prices. Governor Phil Murphy, Governor Jerry Brown, he hiked the gas in California, most expensive in the country. Nancy Pelosi, Minnesota Governor Mark Dayton, one of the dumbest governors in America, et cetera, et cetera. Will Democrats now change their policy on higher gas prices, since you concede it does hurt the middle class? You're right about that. It does.
I think that when gas is at $4 a gallon, thanks to the administration's horrible policies in the Middle East, I think you have to watch out on putting additional taxes on that gas. But if the president could get the things under control that he said he would have great control over when he was campaigning, he said he would have great control over this, Tucker. Those are not my words. Those are his words. If he could get the great control over it, maybe we could figure out ways to raise the gas tax.
There's no shame. There's no shame. Chris, thank you. Good to see you.
None. I don't think the president has any. You're right.
Unbelievable. Disgraced Hollywood mogul and Hillary Clinton donor and best friend Harvey Weinstein surrendered to the cops on 3 different sex crime charges, including first-degree rape. The charges come after a months-long investigation. They stem from alleged assaults on 2 separate women. Those assaults apparently took place in 2004 and 2013. Weinstein went free later today. He posted $1 million cash bail. He faces up to a quarter century in prison if he's convicted. And as our Inside the Issues special continues next, we look at the effect unmitigated immigration has had on Los Angeles. That's the home turf of MS-13. Details from a lifelong resident next. Welcome back to a special edition of Tucker Carlson Tonight, Inside the Issues. MS-13 is menacing cities across America, but animal rights activists on the left continue to defend them rather than question their core assumptions on immigration, the policies that made MS-13 possible. Larry Elder's a radio show host in Los Angeles, where the gang was founded, and really a fixture in L.A. and very knowledgeable in the city. We're glad to have him tonight. So, Larry, you live there in a city that's really been affected not just by MS-13, but by immigration more broadly, totally reshaped by it. What's your perspective on this when you hear people say, you know, the president's being too hard on the gang?
Right. Well, for anybody who feels President Trump was harsh on MS-13 for calling them animals, ought to read the 2007 report by the left-wing Southern Poverty Leadership Conference, Leadership Center, Southern Poverty Leadership Center, I think it is. They did a report in 2007 talking about the 22,000 Latino gang members in Southern California taking their marching orders from the Mexican mafia, Tucker. They are targeting black people for execution, irrespective of whether or not they are members of gangs. The gang cops will tell you they are doing this. Literally, you walk down the street, if you're in the wrong neighborhood, you could be targeted just because you are black. Jamil Shaw II, whose father campaigned with Donald Trump, he was murdered because he happened to be wearing the wrong colors when a Latino gang member saw him and just blew him away. The kid was not a member of a gang. He was a student. He was going to college, a football student. Got mowed down because of this gang member who targeted him just because of his race. So the people that are calling Donald Trump a bigot, you're calling Donald Trump a bigot when he's going after groups that literally are targeting black people for execution.
Well, but that's exactly right. And on the East Coast, we don't have a lot of perspective on this. And I think a lot of our viewers may be shocked to know that Compton, California, which was the largest black community west of the Mississippi, is now only a tiny minority black. It's overwhelmingly Hispanic. There's been huge displacement throughout L.A. County, and there's been a lot of violence that accompanies it. Why is that not covered anywhere?
Well, you know why it's not covered, because the left-wing media doesn't want to talk about it. They are pro-illegal immigration, and if illegal immigrants displace some people in California who happen to be black, well, that's just the price of the ticket. It's an absolute outrage, and one of the reasons that the population of blacks in L.A. has declined since I've been living here is because of the displacement of blacks by Hispanics, many of whom are here illegally. It's one thing to buy property legally. It's another thing to move into a neighborhood illegally and begin to change the culture of that neighborhood, which is what's happening. A group called FAIR, Tucker, estimates that in California alone, illegal immigration, primarily the money spent for education and for medical care, costs the typical Californian $25 billion every single year in this one state alone.
That's unbelievable. I got to get your take on the resolution from the NFL to the kneeling controversy. Were you satisfied by that?
Well, I think it's a compromise. My reaction was to Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr is their coach with the San Antonio, with the Golden State Warriors in the NBA. Yeah. The NBA requires the players to stand. Steve Kerr called the new NFL policy idiotic. Well, if it's idiotic, why is it that your league is requiring players to stand? I would urge Mr. Kerr, when they have their next championship game, which is on Saturday, if he really feels this way, why don't you not only talk the talk, but walk the walk, and stay on the bench during the playing of the national anthem during this playoff game, and let's see what happens to the fans at the NBA.
That's a really good. By the way, why? I mean, what is the core? I mean, I understand there are problems with the country, but it's a pretty great country. How can you support unlimited immigration? The assumption is it's such a great place, everyone wants to come here, and then attack the country on the other hand as if it's like the worst place ever.
It's a really good question, and the reason is because of the Donald Trump derangement syndrome. Right. They just can't stand this guy. Never mind, he wants to do something about giving inner city parents choices in education. The polls show that the average black and brown parent in the inner city want out of the government school to which their kid is mandated to attend. Donald Trump wants to give them an option. He's called a bigot for that. He wants to do something about illegal immigration, which poses competition to jobs and puts downward pressure on people living in the inner city. Yet he's called a bigot. It blows my mind.
I know. It's demented. Larry Elder, thank you. Great to see you tonight.
My pleasure.
Professor Brett Weinstein was driven out of Evergreen State College by a mob, a campus mob. He'll discuss the dire state of free speech on campus with us next as we continue to look inside the issues. We'll be right back.
Good evening and live from America's News Headquarters, I'm Jackie Ibanez in New York. Ireland holding a referendum on abortion today, and exit polls project that the people have overturned that country's strict ban. Two major exit polls both show a landslide victory for the yes vote to repeal the strict constitutional ban that has been in place there since 1983. The official vote count likely won't be completed until sometime tomorrow. Disgraced movie mogul Harvey Weinstein facing decades in prison. A judge today banned him from traveling outside New York and Connecticut after he surrendered in Manhattan to face multiple sex crime charges. The charges against him include rape, criminal sex act, sexual abuse, and sexual misconduct for cases that involve two women. The rape charge alone could put Weinstein in prison for up to 25 years. I'm Jackie Ibanez. Now back to Tucker Carlson Tonight. For all your headlines, log on to foxnews.com.
Welcome back to our Inside the Issues special edition of Tucker Carlson Tonight. Until recently, Brett Weinstein was a biology professor at Evergreen State College in Oregon. Last year, though, a campus mob targeted him when he refused to leave campus because of the color of his skin. He took a principal position as a liberal, by the way. Weinstein later felt he had to resign. He did. This week, he testified to Congress about free speech on campus. And after he did that, he spoke with us. Here it is. Professor, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Tucker. Thanks for inviting me back on.
So, well, amazingly, it's been a year since all of this happened, and we talked to you right in the middle of it. You've had a lot of time to reflect on it. What are the lessons that you're taking from the experience that you went through?
Wow, it is hard to imagine that it's been a year, but it has been almost exactly a year, and much has changed. I think one of the things that's most important is that the conversation is in a very different place than it was last May. We are now able to discuss issues of identity politics, and though people are still inflamed on both sides of that dialogue, we are able to have those discussions in a way that was virtually impossible last May. It seems to me that there is actually a recognition that the country is in danger, and it's being placed in danger by identity politics, both on the far right and the far left. And so I see a movement led in part by the intellectual dark web and the Heterodox Academy and FIRE towards what I would call the patriotic center, where people who disagree over many issues of policy find themselves aligned over basic American principles.
Yes. So as I recall, I mean, you were kind of caught unaware by this. You were absorbed in your academic discipline. You were kind of a traditional free speech liberal. You didn't fully appreciate what had been happening on campus. you stood up and took the traditionally liberal position that you shouldn't attack people on the basis of their skin color, and you got hounded off campus and threatened with violence. How have you reconciled to Evergreen itself? Have you spoken to the president of the college? Have they apologized to you? Where does that all stand now?
Wow, they have done quite the opposite of apologizing. They have, in fact, hired a PR team that periodically demonizes my wife and myself in the Olympian, the local paper, the paper of the state capital. And things on campus have actually grown, as much as it's hard to imagine, much worse than they were during the riots of May 2017. So the Evergreen State College has taken a turn towards the authoritarian that is nothing if not breathtaking. People are being fired for their willingness to offer any sort of challenge to the administration. Those who support the administration in its reckless quest for what is falsely called equity are being promoted, and the college faces a terrible financial crisis as a result of the fact that students are not showing up. Having seen what the campus is descending into, people have decided to go elsewhere for college, which has put the college $6 million in the red.
It's all so sad and crazy. So unless I'm missing something, all you did was say, I'm not going to leave because I'm the wrong skin color. I mean, you took a kind of traditional civil rights position, I think, on what was going on in Evergreen. On what grounds are they attacking you? What are they saying about you?
Well, ironically, the challenge, the one that appears to resonate with people on the far left, is that my talking to you during the riots brought violence from the alt-right to campus, which is a stretch to say the least. It's not that there weren't threats to the campus. There were. There was one threat in particular phoned in from a man in New Jersey who claimed to have a gun and be heading for campus. He did not have a gun, and at any rate was in New Jersey. But the argument effectively is that standing up and speaking about what was taking place was breaking ranks in a way that damaged the college. But what is never said is that you invited me to talk to you and your audience at a time when the rest of the press was looking the other way. And what is hard for people to appreciate is that at the time that I was on your program, the president of the college, George Bridges, had literally stood down the police force so that they were unable to intervene between rioters and members of the community like myself. And the rioters took up carrying baseball bats and batons. They challenged people who disagreed with them physically. And so it was quite a dangerous situation. And the idea that at a moment when, as I understand it from the chief of police, I was apparently being hunted for car to car by protesters. I don't know what they had in mind, but at a time when that was taking place in my own neighborhood, going on a program with an audience understood to be right of center was like some kind of sin.
It's unbelievable. I thought then, and I think now, I doubt we've ever voted for the same candidate, but I really admired your bravery, and I admire it now. Thank you, Professor, and Godspeed. We support you.
Thank you.
An upcoming Hollywood film explores the many lies that helped shape and bring about the Roe v. Wade decision. Our Inside the Issues special takes an inside look at that after the break. Welcome back to a special edition of Tucker Carlson Tonight, Inside the Issues. Hollywood is a liberal place, but not on every single issue. John Voight and Nick Loeb are producing a movie that will explore the real history of the 1973 Roe v. Wade abortion decision. We talked to Nick Loeb about his movie. Here it is. I've never seen anybody attempt to do anything like this in Hollywood. I just want to make sure I know that I'm correct about what you're trying to do. Tell me.
Well, we're actually trying to make the real untold story of Roe v. Wade. It's a movie, not a documentary, no different than if you saw Oliver Stone's JFK, and tell the story of actually what happened from 1966 through 1973 through the characters that drove this to the Supreme Court.
So if you try to make a film that doesn't celebrate that Supreme Court decision as a watermark in the advancement of the human race, I think you're going to run into some trouble, don't you think?
Well, Tucker, I've already run into some problems. So, we had a lot of difficulty raising the money in Hollywood, so we decided to do a crowdfunder. We created a crowdfund site called RoeVWadeMovie.com, and we launched on Facebook to try to raise money, and even Facebook tried to shut us down. And we talk about essentially the story of the film, of what happens and how the media was manipulated by some of the characters like Dr. Bernard Nathanson and Larry Lader and Betty Friedan, and how they were lied to about back alley abortions, and about how many women were dying, and they made up fake numbers for the media to have fake news back then to push their agenda. And a lot of the truth that we talk about in the film, a lot of people don't want that truth to come out.
Tell us what Facebook did. On what grounds would they try and shut that down? What was their excuse?
Their excuse is they said we were spamming. So, we had to set up a separate crowdfunding site, RoeVWadeMovie.com, but then utilize Facebook to promote it. And Facebook is one of the only platforms out there to be able to promote a crowdfunding site. And they stopped us from sharing. I couldn't send out our crowdfunding site to my friends or family. People who liked the site couldn't share it. Dr. Alveda King, who came on as executive producer, was also blocked from sharing it. And so these are the struggles we've had. They've now lifted that block, but now they've created what we call a shadow ban, which I'm learning new terms here, where when we post what we want to promote, it doesn't even show up in the feeds of the people that follow us or our friends, the people we like. We even bought and paid for advertising, and they blocked us from sharing paid advertising. So it's been a struggle to get people to go to RoeVWadeMovie.com to support the film.
Yeah, you picked the one subject on which no debate is allowed. Really quickly, why did you want to make a movie like this?
Well, interestingly enough, Tucker, I was working on a movie about 1.5 years ago, and I have my own pro-life fight going on for life. And the director had read about an article I had written in the New York Times, and he approached me and said, do you want to read the script I've written, Roe v. Wade? I said, no one's really made this movie. And he said, well, there was a made-for-TV movie in '89, but it doesn't really lay out the truth and the facts. And he gave this to me, and I read it, and I was really shocked. Everyone in America has heard of Roe v. Wade, but no one really knows the true story of what led up to that. And I then went on to read about 40 different books and the bios of everyone from Norma McCorvey, who's Jane Roe, who converted to become pro-life, Sarah Weddington, the lawyer, Margaret Sanger, and found a fascinating conspiracy story. One fact, for example, I don't know if you know, 2 of the Supreme Court justices in the case had family members working for Planned Parenthood at the time.
No, I didn't know that. But I'm going to watch this movie and learn more. And I have to say, given the context here, a Hollywood filmmaker trying to make this movie, you are a legitimately brave man.
Thank you, Tucker.
Thank you. We'll be watching. Christianity is nearly extinct in the Middle East, where, of course, it was born, but a few million believers still struggle to preserve their way of life. One of the largest surviving communities of Christians is in Syria, but they could find themselves targeted even more than they already are by Islamists if President Bashar al-Assad falls from power, as many in Washington are hoping he does. We spoke about this with Nina Shea of the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute. Here's our conversation. Nina, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker.
And thank you for caring about this since nobody else does. So that's my first question. Why does nobody care? Syria, whatever you think of Assad, there's a lot of Christians in Syria. Why? Where's our concern for them?
Yeah, well, they're part of a bigger conflict. So I think because they are a minority, they get lost.
Yes.
But they're extremely important, both to the church. This is an ancient community that traces its roots to the very beginnings of Christianity, Paul in Syria, for example.
Yes.
And they're also important for the region, because they're modernizers. This Christian community has brought modern education to Syria and the broader Middle East, modern medicine and hospitals, and also women's equality principles. There is no guardianship restrictions for these women. There's no issue about them driving. There's equal inheritance rights in the Christian tradition there. There's equal testimony in courts. There's a they don't need their husbands or their guardian, their younger brother's permission to go to the hospital.
They're
as they
liberalizers
do
in the best sense. You really see this when you go to Lebanon. The Christians are a force for liberalization in the best sense of that. So why wouldn't this be a concern of the United States? Because we want that.
It really should be, because also it's important to understand in context that Syria and Iraq, which, Syria, the Christians are down about 2/3 now, according to church reports. Iraq, it's over 80%. They have plummeted since the beginning of this century because of ISIS and because of conflict.
So I assume we're letting a lot of Syrian Christians into this country, right?
Wrong. Under Obama, with the expanded Syrian refugee program, the UNHCR let in referred to us 1% of the refugees were Christian. They formed 10% of the population of Syria. So it was disproportionately very, very low.
So we're discriminating against Christians in the refugee population.
Yeah, and it goes on to it carries over to the humanitarian aid. We gave $2 billion, Tucker, in aid to Iraq since ISIS. And about zero of it went to the Archdiocese of Erbil, the Chaldean Catholic Archdiocese of Erbil, which cared for most of the Christians that fled ISIS and were displaced.
So upsetting. In our final seconds, can you, if our viewers want to help in some way, is there a responsible way to do that you're aware of?
Well, there are groups like the Knights of Columbus or Samaritan's Purse, or Aid to the Church in Need, that are giving direct aid. Vice President Pence has made a policy change as of fall for our aid now, to half of our aid to be going directly to these minorities, to Christians and Yazidis in the region. And that is good. The funds are slow in moving, but the policy has begun to change.
Well, good for Pence, and good for you for following this and bringing us that. Nina Shea, thank you from Hudson. The NAACP was founded to fight lynching. For decades, they fought race discrimination. Now they're campaigning against climate change. Huh? That's next on our Inside the Issues special. Welcome back to tonight's special Inside the Issues. American civil rights organizations used to care about, well, civil rights. That's not surprising. In fact, it's good. But recently, the NAACP has declared that it regards climate change as a civil rights issue and has said that Martin Luther King's vision for America cannot be achieved without, quote, environmental justice, whatever that is. We spoke to Black Belt Citizens organizer Portia Shepard about this shift. Here it is. Portia Shepard, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Tucker.
So it's a little bit confusing for a couple reasons. The most obvious is I agree with both goals, a clean environment and racial equality, but it's hard to see exactly how they're tied together. How are they?
Well, I personally cannot speak for the NAACP, but what I can speak for is the environmental injustice that we're having here in the Black Belt of Alabama. And part of it is, as it relates to what Dr. King stood for, he stood for justice and stand up for injustices that are happening in all kinds of communities. When you look at here in the great state of Alabama, it's not just in the Black Belt of Alabama. It just so happened that in Lawrence County and in Macon County, they're experiencing this same fight as it relates to environmental injustices. It just so happened that in our community, majority of the individuals who are facing these problems are people of color.
Okay, but I mean, by that standard, couldn't you say Martin Luther King fought for justice, and he did, and it's unjust for the government to take most of what you earn? I think we'd all agree they shouldn't take most of it.
Oh, yeah.
So Martin Luther King would be in favor of lower tax rates. But he didn't talk about lower tax rates, and he didn't talk about global warming, so maybe we shouldn't get him involved in those issues.
But as it relates to justice and fighting injustice, I'm assuming, because I did not make those particular statements, but I'm assuming because through the legacy of what Dr. King stood for, that's the same message that we're using and the same the tools that we're using in this fight for environmental justice. When you have time and time again, when you have the communities, especially in the Black Belt of Alabama, that don't have adequate sewage, you have communities that are being poisoned by coal ash. So when you have these things, one would think that it must be a civil rights issue because a lot of the communities that are being affected by this, Tucker, are people of color. So in that aspect of it, I can definitely understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of see what you're saying. I mean, there's no doubt that poorer people live in crummier places. They tend to live in places that are more polluted. There are a bunch of reasons for that, some of them obvious, some of them sinister, I agree. But I mean, the most polluted places on Earth, I don't know, Ukraine, where the Chernobyl disaster happened, has no people of color, but has a lot of poor people. And so I guess the problem I have with this is if you frame it as a racial issue, then it scares people and makes them think that there's a conspiracy to pollute just because of their skin color. And if we don't have evidence that's true, we probably shouldn't suggest it, right?
I agree to a certain extent, but as far as the class point that you made up, I absolutely agree with that. That's one of the reasons why I brought up Lawrence and Macon County. That's a predominantly white area, but the median income is similar to what's happening down there in Perry County, which is between $10,000 and $17,000 a year. So you have to say that this is definitely a point of class, and it's not so much that we just want to live in a poor area. It's just that me personally, I can just speak for myself. I inherit land in that particular area. I'm not just going to give because it's a poor area, and I think it's unfair, especially for that particular community where you have majority of the people who live there that own their land have to give it up because you have politicians and people who are in power who made decisions to dump these particular issues on them. And that's one of the fights that Black Belt Citizens is fighting. It's not so much, it's civil rights, it's black power. No, it's not about that. It's about helping people stand up for themselves and get the justice that they deserve. People deserve clean water. My aunt has no business buying 3 to 4 cases of water a week just so she can cook a meal because she's afraid to drink the water that is coming out of her faucet. Those things should not be happening. And it just so happened when you talk about civil rights issue and you see it in Lowndes County, you see it in Gee's Bend, you see it definitely in Uniontown, Alabama, that these issues are definitely taking place. And it just so happened in that area, it is people of color, but it's definitely a class issue.
Well, I gotta say, I kind of agree with a lot of what you're saying, and just I can't resist saying I hope you don't sell your land, because some of the prettiest places in this country are poor places, or rural areas, a lot prettier than downtown Los Angeles or Beverly Hills, I would say. But maybe
a lot safer.
Yeah, a lot safer, nicer people. But maybe part of the problem is that the people in charge ignore and exploit rural America. Do you ever think of that?
Oh, absolutely. You just hit the nail on. I mean, and that goes back to that class statement that you made earlier. It goes right back to that. Even though I'm enduring the same stuff you're enduring, but because I got a little bit more than you, then I can keep you. I can feel like I'm above it, and that's the biggest issue of it all. And so that's what Dr. King was about. That Poor People campaign that he was getting ready to kick off before his assassination. It was poor people. He didn't say poor blacks. He said poor people, and that's important to understand that when you see it time and time again, environmental justice throughout this great nation, it is specifically in poor community, and more than likely, people of color will be affected by that.
Yeah. Well, I kind of agree with what you're saying, and I like rural Alabama because they're nice people.
I can't believe it.
I basically agree. And I appreciate your coming on tonight, Portia. Thanks a lot for that.
Thank you so much, Tucker. Thank you so much for having us.
Well, and another of the most important issues facing this country, horse meat. Should you eat it? An advocate says the whole country can benefit by eating Seabiscuit. That's next.